Thanks for tuning in to the Our Lads Football YouTube channel, Our Lads Football Network. I'm your host, Greg DePalma, as we talk Pittsburgh Steelers. And whenever we talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers, we check out Steelers Depot writer, editor. And can I also say, what other titles can I put on there? This is your thing, though, isn't it, Alex?
It is. I'm not great with titles, but we do it all at Steelers Depot. Write, edit, podcast, draft, you name it, we probably do it.
Awesome. Last time we spoke, there were, because we actually talked, and I picked your brain a little bit about potential needs, but we're going to kind of go now in depth more because a lot has happened since we last spoke. Of course, things did not work out for the Steelers down the stretch. It came real close. But unfortunately, they went on a losing streak at the end of the season. So there still looks like there's going to be some changes, a lot of changes since this conversation. So I'm sure this is going to change things. I guess one of the things I want to ask you about before we get into things like, again, we're going to go into the top 5 offseason needs for the Steelers, salary cap, and how that's going to work out for the Steelers regarding free agency. So a lot to tackle here. But I wanted to ask you about Pickens because we were talking about, really everything was fine then. It seemed like it was fine then. But all of a sudden, like during this losing streak, a lot of negative things came out on the field about Pickens. Was that surprising to you? Was this stuff that you heard behind closed doors that actually came out? Or was this just sudden and all of a sudden this now is a potential problem?
It's never surprising when it comes to George Pickens. And frankly, these things often coincide with losing streaks. When the team does well, things like Pickens maybe being late or some on-field outburst gets swept under the rug. Winning is a great deodorant, as they say. When you lose, these things bubble up and get exposed. And when you have a 5-game losing streak, including the playoff loss for the first time since 1998 in Steelers history, to be held under 18 points in 5 straight games for the first time since 1969. That was Chuck Noll's first year in Pittsburgh. These things really boil to the surface. And so there will be, I assume, a lot of discussion about George Pickens this offseason. I imagine he'll be searching for that long-term extension, now eligible for that type of deal in a hot receiver market. My stance right now, and this is really based off of mostly what ownership has had to say, is that nothing is going to happen with George Pickens. I don't think he'll be traded. I certainly don't think he'll be extended. I think Pittsburgh will try to give it one more year. They do need George Pickens. They do need weapons for this offense to try to get them going in 2025, and they'll take it where it goes after this season. How Pickens responds to that, that's a wild card. But I do think he'll stay in Pittsburgh, but not be extended later this offseason.
Okay, so he is still just trying to remember the whole how it all works. Will he be able to be extended with the option next year? Or is this year he needs to be extended with the 5th-year option?
He was a second-round pick, so no 5th.
Oh, second-year pick. There you go. Second-round pick.
Going into the last year of his rookie contract.
That'll do it. Okay, so next, I want to ask you about, because we talked about Hayward and the fact that it was a couple of years remaining that he would like to play out his remaining contract, and that is now going to be one more year. Do you believe that that's still the case?
Yes, he signed an extension right before the 2024 season that extends him through 2026. I believe his intention will be to play out that deal. And based on how he played in 24, a historically good year for a 35-year-old D-tackle, second most sacks ever by a D-tackle interior lineman of his age, only behind the great Steve McMichael, 8.5 sacks for Hayward, or 8, somewhere around there. Great run defense. The strength was still there. I believe that his intention will be to play it out through 2 more years.
2 more years. Okay. So 2 more years for Hayward. That's good news for Steelers fans. Like you said, the way he's playing. Patrick Queen, he had a really, he was really starting to make his way into the top of the list as far as inside linebackers in the NFL. Steelers spent more money on him than any other free agent. And it did not appear that he had as good as a season as the Steelers would have liked. Is that the case?
I would say that's fair. There were ups and downs. I think it was a quiet start, too many missed tackles. He made more splash plays in the middle of the season. The run defense calmed down, and then the whole defense really waned as the season went along. A lot of communication issues late in the year that contributed to that losing streak. Queen, not solely responsible for that, but as the green dot every down guy, you're going to weigh or bear some of that responsibility. And just overall, the communication wasn't as strong or as crisp as it would have ideally been. And the run defense struggled. They really struggled to fit the run and adjust to motions and those types of things. So yeah, it was just an okay year. It's his first year, being the green dot in Pittsburgh in a new place. And the book was kind of, he worked better in Baltimore when he was not the green dot, when they brought in Roquan Smith and gave him the green dot. Quinn could play fast and free. He was better in that role. But in Pittsburgh, he'll have to be the green dot. That's what he was signed to be. And hopefully in year 2, full season with the team, can calm those things down, give him a good foundation, make him a better player in 25. Plus, he's still, 25, 26 years old. So still in the prime of his career.
Okay, that makes sense. And then also Minka. Is he still playing okay, or is he starting to, is there something going on there where his play has just not been on par with the way that his, because we know how good he can be. Do you think the Steelers are satisfied with his play the last couple of years?
They said they have been. I would say that Minka had a down year by his standards, and the excuses that were made for him in 23 did not apply to 24. He was healthy. He was back in his free safety, post safety role. They had a clear, strong safety addition, and a great one at that in Deshaun Elliott. They didn't have that in 23. It made Minka play in the box more, made him less effective. So I'm not really sure what it was this year. It was probably an average year by any safety standards, which is below average for Minka. Thought his tackling was still good. His run defense was good, but you didn't have the impact plays. Even in coverage one-on-one, he was not as contesting on the ball as he has been in the past. And so I think sometimes those years happen. Sometimes you have down years, even for great players. TJ Watt had a quiet end of the season. I'm not ready to give up on Minka, but 25 will be a big year for him for sure.
Okay. Now, let's get into this as far as what to look forward to in the offseason. A whole bunch of stuff to go over here. Let's start with the coaching staff. Have there been any major changes?
No major changes, much to the chagrin of the Steelers fans, and I don't expect
why
to happen because they want to burn this whole thing down. And
really,
Pittsburgh is not a burn it down, burn the boats kind of a team. So Mike Tomlin, of course, returning. A lot of speculation. Could he go? Could he get traded? I always loathe the coach trade talk. There's no more media catnip story than will a coach get traded. This stuff just does not happen unless you're retirement Sean Payton. But if you're actively coaching a team, the last trade of such was Herm Edwards in 2006. This stuff doesn't happen. They signed Tomlin to a 3-year, $50 million extension right before the season began. They're not going to eat that kind of dead money. He'll be back in 25, obviously, and almost certainly in 2026. Coordinators are going to stay. Arthur Smith's going to stay for OC. Terrell Austin's going to stay as DC. The only changes so far, and still things could change, is linebackers coach Aaron Curry left to take the same job with the Jets, and reportedly the team has hired Gerald Alexander to be their defensive backs coach, although we don't know what that means for current defensive backs coach Grady Brown. Is he leaving? Is he getting a promotion? There's not really been any final word on what's going to happen to him. And so honestly, Greg, Curry and Brown were like two young, exciting, up-and-coming coaches, and if you lose both those guys in this offseason, not going to be super satisfying. So I'm not entirely sure the status of Brown as of right now. I'm sure we'll get clarity here within a couple of days, but minor positional coach changes is the case, and they've yet to hire a replacement for Aaron Curry. That name is still unknown.
Okay. Well, as a Jet fan, I'm real happy to hear that. Looks like they've got themselves a good linebacker coach then.
Yeah, Curry, I thought, did a nice job. Of course, played in this game, former first-round pick, didn't have the career he envisioned, had some injuries, but was out in Seattle, got hired by Pittsburgh to replace Brian Flores. Good coach from what I was able to tell. It's tough to always glean positional coaches, but I think Aaron Glenn's putting together a really good staff over there.
All right. Excellent. Now, let's talk about free agency. And taking a look at, there's, quite a bit of decisions that have to be made here. And the Steelers have good cap space. By the way, what's the draft capital for the team?
Pretty standard overall. Day 3 gets a little funky. They're without a 6th-round pick that's going to Chicago as part of that Justin Fields deal. They get a couple of 7ths from Kenny Pickett trade. They traded a 7th to Green Bay, so I think they're without a 6th. They have 2 7ths, and then basically it's a standard 1 through 5.
Okay. All right. So we'll start at the obvious, the 2 quarterbacks, Fields and Wilson. Do you think either of them will be back?
I do, and I base that off of what Art Rooney, the second team president owner, said his preference was to retain one of Wilson or Fields. The jury's still out on who. A lot of local, national media pundits believe it'll be Fields returning and Russ leaving, but Russell Wilson has been adamant that he wants to return. He does have a close and good relationship with Mike Tomlin, and Tomlin has certainly picked Russell Wilson at basically every turn along the way. So the jury's out. I do think they want to bring one of those guys back, because there aren't a lot of great external options. It's a pretty weak free agent class with some older veterans. I don't know if Pittsburgh wants to go down that road with unknown and outside people. Of course, the draft class is not particularly strong as it was last year either. And I think Pittsburgh would like to have some continuity, to have the same OC, same quarterback in back-to-back years, rather than starting from scratch with a lot more unknown, try to build something up. Now, Fields is younger, probably going to be cheaper, help the run game. That all makes sense. But we're just going to have to wait and see. There's not really been a lot of clarity on which direction this team will go. And of course, contracts and other potential suitors. Could Fields go somewhere? I think he'll have more of a market this year than last year. What about Russ? There's quarterback opportunities. So it's really unknown. But if I had to guess, it'll be Fields, or at the least one of these quarterbacks will return in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, Fields looks like a guy that just needs a little bit of, and I know he's been around for a little while, so it's not like he's a kid anymore. But look, the Bears to the Steelers is just night and day when it comes to the way that you build franchises at this point in time. And it would be nice to see Justin Fields get an opportunity in Pittsburgh. And I understood why they went to Russell. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it was the wrong idea. But at some point, like you said, I mean, do you believe Justin did enough with his time last year to have a full offseason again here with the same staff and everybody to see if he could start next year and give him some time to be the starter next year?
I think so. I think there's a case to be made for that. I thought he played within structure. I thought, like you said, what Pittsburgh gave him that Fields lacked in Chicago was some guardrails and not the pressure of being the franchise guy, just be Justin Fields. And so to go 4-2, to throw only one interception over that span, to play within scheme and structure, Pittsburgh certainly had him playing more conservatively, in part because he was not supposed to start the year. It was Russell Wilson until 3 days before week 1 when the calf injury popped back up and Fields was inserted back into the lineup. But, Fields also couldn't elevate this offense the way that Russell Wilson could briefly whenever he took over the reins. And that's why Mike Tomlin made the change in the first place. So I would answer a two-part that yes, Fields to me showed enough to be the guy for 2025, but I don't think the long-term answer is on this roster right now. I think that guy's in college or in high school somewhere where Pittsburgh was going to have to eventually draft in the first round, as they did with Bradshaw, as they did with Ben, as most teams do to become contenders, is drafting in the first round. Doesn't mean you have to tank and get a high pick. The Chiefs, the Bills, the Ravens, they didn't tank to get Mahomes and Allen, Lamar Jackson. You can trade up. You can be aggressive. Pittsburgh should at some point. But short term, I think it's Fields. Long term, the jury's out.
Yeah, I believe, and I think there are some that agree with me at Ourlads, and we'll talk more about that as the head scouts at Ourlads give their final opinions. And we are going to have a mock draft show next week, the next two in the next week. But that is that there's a really good chance that the second wave of quarterbacks could actually end up better than the first wave because they got some talent, Will Howard, maybe Quinn Ewers. I know some people like McCord, but Jackson Dart. So there's some talent there. And but I think you're right on when it's about chances are, unless you use, especially where the Steelers are, unless you use a pick on one of those guys, it's going to be down the road. It's good. And that's why having Fields here, maybe give him the whole year, could be something. And I don't know, has there been any talk at all about some of the other young quarterback veterans in the league? Zach Wilson, a Jake Browning. Who knows what happens if the Vikings sign Sam Darnold? Do they want to trade JJ? Any of those types of names?
Not much chatter about that. That could be a potential backup type option because you assume that Russ and Fields will not both return next year. And so that's going to leave a clear hole as a number two, where maybe a young guy were to step in. Art really talked about wanting the starter and backup to have the same skill set. So hypothetically, let's say Justin Fields resigns. They want to have a mobile backup. Who knows who that could be? Maybe a Zach Wilson, maybe a Snoop Huntley, somebody like that. But that's probably more backup than it's going to be a starter conversation. Okay.
Running back. So we have a very similar kind of question here. Now, Harris did not get the fifth-year option last year, so that's why he's a UFA. Warren is restricted. So what do you think the deal is going to be? Do they both come back? or are they going to just fly with Warren, bring someone else in, and let Harris walk?
That's my read of it. Ever since they declined the fifth-year option on Najee Harris last May, my belief was that was going to be his last year in Pittsburgh in 2024. Nothing happened during the course of the season that changed my opinion. It was a very Najee Harris season. He's durable. He's available. He's never missed a game in his NFL career. He's rushed for 1,000 yards in all 4 of his seasons, which he's the only back to do that. I know 1,000 yards is not what it used to be, but there's still something to be said for durability and consistency. There is some recent reporting locally that suggests Harris could return, but I think Pittsburgh wants to get more explosive, get more speed in the backfield, and just offensively in general. Now, Jaylen Warren almost certainly will return, probably a second-round tender to secure him, make sure he comes back, and so you should have Warren. I think Harris will go somewhere else. I think they'll draft a mid-round running back. It's a really good running back class overall, rounds 2 through 4, and maybe a new third stringer with Cordero Patterson not being the guy they envision as a returner running back when they signed him following Arthur Smith from Atlanta to Pittsburgh in 2024. So I think it'll be a pretty new look backfield. I think Warren returns and goes from being 1B to 1A. They'll draft somebody and add somebody as a third string type of guy.
So, yeah, it looks like that could very well happen where the two number 2s, Fields and Warren, become the number 1s. Do you think that's if that happens, most fans will be okay with that in Pittsburgh?
I think so. That's my sense of what the fan base would prefer. Fields to come back at quarterback and Warren to be the lead guy as running back. Sure.
Okay. All right. Wide receiver, Van Jefferson and Mike Williams. Looks like Williams, I guess, won't be back. Correct me if I'm wrong. And Van Jefferson, he's a favorite of Arthur Smith. He's got that run blocking ability, which is important. And he had a lot, he played a lot last year too. So what do you think about the wide receiver free agents?
I think it's a pretty good pool. I know some people have downplayed it, but I think when you look at that coupled with a weaker draft class compared to the really just 8+ years we've had in recent seasons, Greg, I think you look for a free agent or some veteran type of option. They certainly need to add something. They really dropped the ball by not adding anybody after trading Deontay Johnson last year. They made some attempts with drafting Roman Wilson, who was hurt throughout his rookie year. They struck out on the Brandon Ayuk deal, Devontae Adams. They settled for Mike Williams. That didn't provide a whole lot of boost to Pittsburgh. They got to get a number 2 receiver. Even in an Arthur Smith offense that does not always lean on a number 2 receiver to have high volume, you can't have Van Jefferson running all the empty snaps that he did and guys like that. So I think you look at guys, T. Higgins is going to be too pie in the sky. I'd be very surprised if T. Higgins became a Pittsburgh Steeler, but you have guys like Amari Cooper, like Chris Godwin, Devontae Adams, I assume, will become available once he's released from the Jets. Deebo Samuel, trade rumors there. Cooper Kupp, although I'm less enthused about that, that's at least another option out there. So, and those are only a couple of names. And so I think a veteran receiver, Pittsburgh has the cap space. They can add these guys. That makes the most amount of sense to me.
Okay. But did Calvin Austin do enough? I know he had a big punt return touchdown, but he looked like he finally looked the part. Let's just put it that way.
Sure. I would say it was a breakout year for Calvin Austin. If there was a bright spot in terms of emergence, Pickens was Pickens, but Austin had 38 catches, had 4 or 5 touchdowns. He provided a lot of big plays. Now, he's a number 3 receiver type. I think it's asking too much him to be a number 2, but he showed more toughness, a bigger catch radius than he's shown in past years. Remember, he had that knee injury his rookie year, or that foot injury, whatever it was. And so he missed his entire rookie year, came back last year, was underutilized in this offense. I thought Arthur Smith used him more effectively, but he's more number 3 than number 2.
Speaking of Roman Wilson, and I'm a Michigan fan, so I know him well. Very clutch kid, does all the typical Michigan kid, let's just put it that way. And I would believe, though, that he's going to be just fine as soon as he gets healthy. The question is Roman Wilson more on the lines of they're hoping he'll be a number 2 guy, or is he somebody that they want working in the slot?
It's just hard to say. We barely got to see him his rookie year. He got hurt the first padded practice of training camp, missed the entire rest of the summer, didn't play in a preseason game, was working back to health midseason. He got in 1 game against the Raiders week 6, played 5 snaps, was not targeted, hurt his hamstring a week or 2 later, did not dress again, did not come back on the 53 after being placed on IR. And so you don't want to give up on him. Calvin Austin's a great example of a rookie year washed and the guy's able to return. But you just can't bank too much on that, I think, right now. I think that's why you still go after that veteran option. And so if you could hypothetically, Greg, have Pickens as your number 1, veteran receiver number 2, Austin, Wilson number 3, number 4, Skoranek number 5, special teamer, big package run blocker, that's a group you can work with if you get the run game going, if you develop this offensive line. But Wilson, you just hope he can kind of, do something, obviously, a sophomore year, but you're not going to count on him to be the guy.
So you actually think they're going to probably bring Jefferson and Skoranek back, or just Skoranek because of his special teams ability? And is Jefferson almost like a fallback if they can't find another receiver?
That's probably fair. Yeah, both free agents. I think Skoranek makes more sense for the special teams aspect. Jefferson, as you said, he did his role. He did a lot of the grunt work and dirty work, but I think that's, if he's still out there, you want to bring him to camp come June. Okay,
Yep.
you can maybe do that, but not going to offer the special teams value that Skoranek does as a gunner. And so I think you give him the edge and talk to him first before Van Jefferson.
Okay. The offensive line. So there's a lot going on here. So Daniels, the whole idea, and again, I think we talked about this, was that in next season, drafting McCormick in the 4th round, that was because he would eventually take Daniels' spot when Daniels became a free agent. Now, Daniels didn't play a lot, of course, because of the injury. So the first question is that just still what's going to happen? Is McCormick is more than likely going to be the starting right guard next year, and Daniels will not be back?
That is still my expectation, yes. I think the injury actually increases the chances of Daniels returning because it suppresses his market value, but still I think they like what they saw from McCormick. They'd rather have him start than be the backup for 2025 behind Daniels coming off the Achilles, where it's just kind of an unknown. And so, yes, my expectation is Daniels still walks. McCormick is the right guard for 2025.
Okay. Herbig, Nate, he was supposed to potentially start. It looked like he was ready to start. He gets injured. Zach Frazier might have taken over anyway, but Herbig misses the season, and Frazier immediately takes over, does the job. He's the man. He ain't going anywhere. But will Herbig be back to be a good insurance veteran for the interior?
Possibly. I'm not going to rule it out. I think it'll be cheap to re-sign. There is going to be need as a backup center behind Zach Frazier. Right. This is Frazier's job today and for the next decade. He's going to be the next long-term Pittsburgh Steelers center, and that's fantastic to see. Herbig could come back. It's going to be up to him. His brother plays for the team, Nick Herbig, and so I think he'd like to stay in Pittsburgh. If the Steelers want to offer him a 1-year contract for pretty cheap money, that makes sense.
All right. Dan Moore Jr. Now, it was supposed to be a situation where the Steelers go out, draft their tackle in the 1st round, Fatanu, and then he would take over and be the man, but he gets hurt, doesn't play. Dan Moore actually comes in, has an okay year, but now he is a free agent. So how are they going to handle this? Is it just, okay, Fatano's healthy, he's the man again? And is it the same situation like Daniels, or is it any different?
I think it's going to end up being the same like Daniels, where Moore's going to walk, hit free agency, and what they'll do is they'll shift Broderick Jones over from right to left tackle and then put Fautanu in at right tackle. They're still high on him. Obviously, the injuries unfortunately wiped out almost entirely his rookie season, had an MCL sprain in the summer, came back, started 1 game against Denver week 2, dislocated his kneecap during practice before week 3, out for the rest of the season, but they're still high on him. Dan Moore, I think, has done a nice job overall. He's consistently, even if incrementally, progressed throughout his career, but I think they want to roll with the young guys. You draft these 1st-round picks in Broderick Jones and Fautanu. You got to eventually let them sink or swim. And Dan Moore, it's going to be a cost. Anytime you're a young free agent tackle with experience, there's no line tax out there. And so it's kind of probably too pricey for Pittsburgh. If you lock up Dan Moore, then you're basically saying that Jones, Fautanu, one of them's not going to start. Don't think Pittsburgh wants that. So I think Moore will go somewhere. They'll shift Jones over to left tackle and put Fautanu at right tackle.
Yeah, the big difference, of course, in that comparison is the fact that Moore was healthy. And that means he is, like you said, the NFL has major needs, as we all know, in the NFL at offensive line. And Moore is definitely going to have suitors, and he's going to make a lot more money than he probably deserves. But that's because of the need for the position. Okay, Anderson actually played a little bit backup injuries. He's a free agent. Is he a valuable backup?
Anderson, yeah, Spencer Anderson, yeah, he'll return. He's on his rookie contract still, and so he'll be there as a swing guard, emergency tackle type of thing. I think Pittsburgh could still have value in adding a low-level veteran free agent tackle. You don't want to just hand Broderick Jones the job because he's a guy that's not in position to do that. But yeah, Spencer Anderson can be there as a backup for sure.
So yeah, so he actually did. And did he play okay, or is that all he is? He's just a backup, right?
Yeah, he's just okay. He was the first fill-in after they had the injury at left guard to Sayamalu to begin 2024 because he missed the first month with a pec injury, and then he ended up kind of basically losing his job to McCormick, and then Daniels ended up going down too. Anderson, he's versatile, he's flexible, he's kind of like Chris Hubbard, can kind of do a lot of things, jack of all trades, master of none. But he's not going to be anything more than a backup, probably. And also, just if I can just say quickly, Greg, for the offensive line overall, assuming that Pittsburgh, the franchise quarterback, does not magically fall out of the sky and into their lap in 2025. The real focus and the real measuring stick for this team in 25 is the progression of this offensive line. They have to develop this offensive line if they want to take this Eagles-like page out of their playbook. You got to build the trenches. They've invested heavily in the offensive line. Omar Khan, Andy Weidel coming over from Philly. They have put a lot of capital, a lot of investment in this O-line. These guys have to work. Frazier's been promising. Fautanu, who knows? Jones took a big step back in year 2. He's got to be better in his 3rd year. McCormick in his 2nd year. And so the real litmus test for how much progression Pittsburgh can make will be judged by the development and progression of this young offensive line.
Okay. Defense. And up front, we talked about Hayward. We know Benton is a keeper. But Ogunjobi, it looks like his game has been slipping a little bit. He's not a free agent. But is he a cap casualty? It looks like the team can save $7 million.
Yes, I would say he's one of the top candidates to be cut. There's a March roster bonus due on him for a couple million. And so I think that's decision time for Pittsburgh. My anticipation is they'll release Ogunjobi and be drafting defensive line very early in the 2025 draft. Ogunjobi, inconsistent. When he's at his best, he can flash, but the production just simply has not been there. Besides Cam Hayward, the rest of the D-line had 4 sacks this year, only 2 after the bye week, just not getting enough from the D-line. And you allow 299 to Baltimore in the playoffs. That's not Pittsburgh Steelers football on the ground. You're going to make some big changes up front. They need some youth. They need some physicality. They're not getting that. They have to add Ogunjobi, likely expendable.
By the way, Loudermilk is a free agent. Is he worth bringing back as a depth piece?
You could. I wouldn't hate the idea. He's a rotational 3-4 base end, not going to offer much as a pass rusher. And so if you want to do that for a 1-2 year deal for, I don't know, making up numbers, 6-7 million, that's fine. But he is who he is. He's improved as a run defender, improved his pad level, become a more focused pass rusher. I remember whenever he was coming out his rookie year, he's trying these cross chop. He's trying all these fancy finesse moves. Not his game. He's going to be a bull rush type of a guy, but he's still not going to be much of a pass rusher. But rotational 3-4 end as a backup, that's okay.
Linebackers. Roberts, a free agent, good player. And Holcomb, unfortunately, has been taking quite a while to return from the ACL. And he is somebody that actually can save, I believe, the team $6 million. So what do you think? I know he was playing pretty well before the injury. So what do you think they're going to do with Holcomb?
Yeah, I think cutting him is certainly a realistic expectation. There is a roster bonus due with him, although I'm not sure when that occurs, if that's a March thing or a later make the 53 type of thing with him. I wonder if his status will be a little tied to Landon Roberts. Like you said, free agent, I really would like Landon Roberts back. He is a traditional thumper, a tone setter. Nobody blows up pulling guards the way Landon Roberts does, and Pittsburgh needs that physicality to preserve and to add to it. So maybe if they get Roberts back, then you cut Holcomb and basically almost a corresponding type of move. You might hold on to Holcomb until you make sure you have more clarity there. Pittsburgh has really enjoyed a 3-man rotation at off-ball linebacker each of the last 2 years. This year it was Queen, Roberts, and Peyton Wilson. Last year it was Quan Alexander, Roberts, and Cole Holcomb before the injury. And so I think they want to keep that, and so hopefully they can keep and re-sign Roberts. If they do, I don't know what kind of role Holcomb could have, and that probably makes him somebody worth cutting to save that cap space and basically get Roberts for free. Just unfortunate for Holcomb. Like you said, playing well, that terrible knee injury November 2023. He came back and practiced very late in 2024. But if they sign Roberts back with Queen and an emerging, ascending Peyton Wilson, I just don't see the role, the value with Cole Holcomb.
And it makes a lot of sense that Roberts will be back, especially with the cap space the team has. And
Sure.
We talked about it before. I mean, I'm a big Peyton Wilson fan, and he came through with flying colors as a rookie. So it looks like they're set there. Okay. And then in the defensive backfield, you've got, I guess the big question would be Dante Jackson. So he's a free agent coming off a poor season. what do you think they're going to do there? And they have a few other guys that were, depth pieces, guys that played a little bit, a couple hundred snaps apiece between KZ, Pierre, and Sutton.
It's a really good question, Greg. Corner's the one spot I don't have a lot of clarity on. Will Jackson come back or not? He got off to a good start, I would say, in 2024, but then had a terrible finish. And injuries played a role. He had shoulder issues, back problems, missed some time. But either way you want to slice it, he really regressed after the bye week, and teams picked on him. I think Pittsburgh should explore upgrading there. There's some cornerback options out there. Travarius Ward from the 49ers makes a lot of sense to me. Pittsburgh, again, has the cap space to afford those guys. And so I think swapping out Jackson for somebody like Ward is probably the best approach there. But yeah, I think the real underrated area for Pittsburgh is slot corner. I've probably told this to you before, Greg. Pittsburgh has not addressed slot corner since losing Mike Hilton after the 2020 season. They have had this rotating cast of characters. They've not found that long-term solution, that high-end talent. Beanie Bishop was basically handed the job last year because he was just healthy. They literally said, like, whoever is healthy is going to be our slot corner, and ended up being Bishop. And he made some plays. He had 4 interceptions, but I think you want a stronger option there. They tried to pivot to Cam Sutton after the bye. He was a disaster. He should not, and almost positively will not return. And so they need to find that long-term slot option. I think there are some free agent options that can address that. I'm a big Nate Hobbs fan from the Raiders, and the Steelers just hired back Gerald Alexander, who was the Raiders safety coach in 2024. That's a really good connection there. You want to find that long-term option for a team that saw the value of Hilton and all that he brought, and for a team that was in sub-package, the most they've been in over the past decade. You want to get that real good physical slot corner, somebody who can fit the run, somebody who can blitz and certainly cover as well. They've not had that. I think they need to find it. You can find that with somebody like Nate Hobbs.
All right. Porter, how did he do? Forgot to ask you about him. Did he just have a little bit of a step back in his second season?
I would say with like Keanu Benton, there was maybe a step forward, but not the leap forward that we hoped that he would take. I mean, he was the number one corner for this team. He drew tough matchups, no question about that. And he made some plays. It just, when it was bad, it was bad. He had something like 14 penalties this year, and they all basically came across 3 or 4 games. And so he was like Pringles. You can't just stop at one. He would just get 2, 3 penalties. He had 6 penalties in a game against the Bengals. I mean, it just got kind of ridiculous at times, but he also showed the ability to play clean during other stretches of his game. And so still number one corner for this team. I want to see a bit more from him, certainly cut down on the stacking the penalties in 2025. I would say a step forward, but not a leap forward.
Okay. By the way, Killebrew, I know he's making a little bit of money, but he's a very valuable special teams player. At least I know he was. Of course, he was a Pro Bowler, actually all-pro player, which is significantly better in my mind, in 2023. Did he just continue to play like that in 2024? Is he still a big part of their special teams?
He is. He didn't have the block punts and some of the flashy moments he did because teams are really trying to scheme him away, but special teams captain, good value there. I will say, though, backup safeties are real underrated need for this team. You have Elliott, you have Minka. You do not have much behind those. Killebrew is just a special teamer. KZ's a free agent. He's in his 30s. I would not expect him back. They need to find somebody who can wear that KZ hat, that Sutton hat that can move around, help free up Minka on third downs to rotate coverages to disguise and have somebody spin back to play deep half or deep post. Minka can come down and rob. So they do need somebody who can do that. They don't really have that guy right now, and Sutton should not return. I don't think KZ returns. And so I do think backup safety is important, but Killebrew will still hold down the fort as his special teams, stalwart kind of a role.
Before we get to the team needs, Johnston, of course, came over, didn't last, injured, out for the year early. They brought back Waitman. What happens next year? Does Johnston just come back and reclaim the job?
We'll see. I think what'll happen there is you go into training camp. Waitman signed a 2-year deal whenever he was brought back by Pittsburgh, and so he's under contract. So I think what happens is you go into camp with Waitman, with Johnston, evaluate his health. That was a nasty knee injury that Johnston suffered in the season opener. You want to see where Johnston's at medically, and then just from a performance standpoint, and then decide from there. And so I think you'd still like Cameron Johnston to be the guy, considering you signed him to be the guy. But you go into Latrobe next year, see where they're at, let them battle, and go from there.
Okay, now let's go with team needs. And it's up to you if you want to go down in the order, or we can just throw them out there, and then we can do the order at the end. But I'll leave it up to you. Would you want to start with top need?
Let me just throw the needs out there, and then we'll kind of order
That'll
them once
work.
we kind of get it all straightened out. I would say top needs overall, wide receiver, for reasons I mentioned earlier. You have Pickens and not much else. Defensive line, have to get younger, have to get stronger up front. No question about that. I would put in both cornerback spots. I don't want to have the catch-all at corner. I think slot corner and outside corner, there's a big difference there, and there's certainly big needs at both positions. And
Okay.
then I would say running back too, under the assumption Najee Harris does not return. And this
Okay.
all kind of assumes that one of the quarterbacks will resign. Obviously, quarterback's a huge need, but I'm going to just assume that Russ or Fields will come back, and that kind of takes care of things for the short term.
So do you think then if Fields does come back, let's just say, or one of them does matter, that quarterback is not really considered a top 5 need? Or do you think that no matter what happens, it's almost like well, it's obviously the top need, but it's one of those things like, of course, it's the top need, but we
Yeah,
have to, it's one of those things. Yeah.
it's kind of its own special category. Obviously, it's a
Yeah.
need, but like, how do you fill it if you don't have, the top draft pick or anything like that? And with the framework of the poor free agent class and not too many draft options. So, I mean, it is the elephant in the room. We can call
Yeah.
it that. It is that just always there, and you have to address it at some point. But if you re-sign one of those guys, I could see a day 2 option, like you mentioned, Will Howard, Jalen Milroe, Kyle McCord. That is possible. I think Pittsburgh will certainly have an eye towards the future. But if you re-sign one of those guys, it kind of takes care of the short-term logistics of who will start week 1 for us.
Yeah, that's a very interesting one because you mentioned Milroe, even though he did not have a good week at the All-Star game, and it was kind of iffy this year. But the fact is, you were talking about keeping similar quarterbacks. He's a very similar type of quarterback. If you're going to look at any of the other, I mean, Dart, can move around, but he's the most similar, don't you think?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah,
Out of the top guys.
I did the scouting report on Miller for Steelers Depot, and my comp was Justin Fields, where you have a lot of athleticism, size, playmaking, mechanically things to work on, accuracy was spotty. Of course, Fields has improved some of those things. He's really cleaned up his mechanics in Pittsburgh, but I see similarities there. Miller was probably a little bigger, a little thicker, more powerful runner, but they're both a dynamic type of runners with things to work on as passers. And so, yeah, I mean, this is a team that probably regrets on passing on Jalen Hurts back in whatever that was, 2021, 2020. And so Milroe, some similarities there too. Could Pittsburgh look at that in round 2? Can't rule that out.
I think if what we saw with Purdy and what we're seeing, Hurts, I just think that we're at that stage now where I think things are changing a little bit where I'm not saying it's going to happen every year, but you can now, it's a lot easier to find quarterbacks out of the first round because there are so many guys that have the experience that is really something that is so valuable at the college level. And there are going to be some quarterbacks, again, like I said, including Milroe, that not going to get drafted as high as the top 2, but could still end up really having really good careers. So we'll keep an eye on that. All right. So if we were going to put it into order, then let's just say, I guess, quarterback probably number 1. But if you had to take from the other non-quarterbacks, would it be defensive line or a cornerback? Top.
I think a lot of people would instinctually say receiver, but I'm with you, Greg. I would say defensive line. I think Pittsburgh has to get back to their roots of being able to stop the run. In Pittsburgh, for the last 50 years, the whole mantra has been stop the run, everything else falls into place. You stop the run, you earn the right to rush the passer, you create 3rd and longs, that creates sacks, pressure, takeaways. That's the winning formula. And so I think D-line is number 1. There's a really good parallel. When they drafted Cam Hayward in 2011, they didn't need Cam Hayward, but they were 2 years out from needing a replacement behind Aaron Smith, behind Brett Kiesel. Hayward sat his first 2 years. And with Hayward probably 2 years left in his career, it was almost kind of a comparison of let's start drafting his replacement 2 years out. Now, a rookie this year is going to play a whole lot more and a lot sooner than what Hayward did, but there's kind of a poetry and symmetry to find that replacement 2 years out. And again, if you cut open Joby, you have a big need at that left end spot opposite Cam Hayward.
So it sounds like, and this is not a surprise because wide receiver is more sexy than a 3-4 defensive lineman. But it sounds to me like there's a lot of fans out there that would hope that their top pick would be a wide receiver. Is you think that's the case?
Yeah, I think in this fantasy football world, it's a little bit of an intoxication for that. But I mean, I think Steeler fans recognize the need for defensive line help, and it's a really good D line class. I mean, there's a
Oh
need, if
yeah.
there's a year to need defensive linemen, it is
Yep.
this one, and so that really does fit with Pittsburgh well in a weaker receiver class. I really think D line has a good chance to be the pick at 21 for Pittsburgh.
Yeah, the top three positions in this draft are running back, tight end, and defensive tackle, as far as the depth, the quality of players. So yeah, so considering two of those positions are of need for the Steelers, it's a good draft for that. All right, so that means that we'll put wide receiver after defensive line and not corner?
Yeah, I'll put receiver number 2, especially with Pickens last year of his contract. Same with Austin. Need a number 2.
Okay.
Receiver number 2 is fair.
And then you got the DBs would be next, and then running back would be last.
Yeah, I would say that's probably fair. There's going to be need for running back, but a little less urgency there with Warren already being there and a little bit of the fungibility of the position. So that's probably a good way to rank it, sure.
And again, I mean, you're always able to find running backs late in the draft, in any draft, but this draft is just loaded with talent, loaded. So the Steelers fans, you're going to just hope you get the right guy, because there are going to be just a boatload of options. So you probably don't have to go high. You can get a really good one, 3rd round, 4th round, 5th round. So that's probably the way they'll go. All right. And then the last thing before I let you go, Alex, are there any players that have developed or are potentially developing? And again, we've talked about Fatanu. He works into that angle I'm going at, which is a player that really the fans, maybe outside of Pittsburgh, don't realize that there are guys already on the roster that are ready to take the next step, or maybe could take the next step if they stay healthy, or if they keep progressing and maybe take one of these spots. So are there any players we have not talked about that fit that role of a player that looks like he's getting a little bit better after his rookie season or first season or practice squad, that we need to be keeping an eye on?
Of players we have not talked about, I think Darnell Washington, the tight end in year 2, took a big step forward. He's going to be that big body blocker. I thought he really improved in the run game. He was asked to pass protect a lot more this year. That was evident beginning in training camp. He did a nice job there, but he's already taken that stride. I'll give you just one other name, and he's kind of a wild card, but Corey Trice Jr. at cornerback. He's a really gifted corner. He's that avatar type of corner Pittsburgh likes. He's built like Joey Porter. He's 6'1", 6'2", 33-plus-inch arms. He's a big physical guy. His issue has always been injuries. That was the issue at Purdue. He had ankle issues. He had knee issues. He tore his ACL there. Fell to the 7th round because of it. Comes to Pittsburgh, 7th-round pick in 2023. Tears his ACL in the first padded practice, misses his entire rookie year, comes back, gets healthy for 2024, has a good preseason, makes the 53, hurts his hamstring in week number 3, misses almost the entire season, comes back very late. They put him on Jamar Chase. He took his lumps, but held his own. Very physically gifted corner. He had his first interception this year off of Bo Nix in week 2 in the end zone. That was a big primetime play for him. All the tools, I think, are there with Corey Trice. The question is, do you trust this guy to be healthy for 17 games? Hard to do, but if he can stay healthy and continue to develop and work on his craft, something he's not gotten to do a ton of because he's always been so consistently hurt, but if he can do that, that's a really promising player that could be a steal for Pittsburgh.
I like it. See, those are the types of players I'm talking about. All right. Excellent. Great job. Yeah, he's got good size, doesn't he, for a corner?
Oh, yeah. He was a former safety at Purdue. They moved him to corner, and he's kind of that big new age type of corner that Pittsburgh loves collecting.
Nobody in here, right? These reserves, these like future guys, they don't ever seem to pan out very often.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing really crazy. The only crazy thing is the only quarterback technically under contract right now is Skylar Thompson, who they signed shortly after the season. But they'll add to that, obviously. Beyond that, Dylan Cook, a tackle that I thought had some promise. He got hurt this year. Unfortunate for him, but no other names really sticking out in a big, notable, let's talk about it type of way.
You know, Lance, he had a really big preseason with the Rams a couple of years ago, and it looked like he was on his way, but just hasn't been able to take that next step with the Rams, or he's with the Jets the last couple of years. So too bad, but hey, that's the NFL.
If I could just say just really quickly, it's not one of the top 5 needs, but Pittsburgh, they need a better impact in the kick return game. They signed Cordell Patterson literally hours after the NFL passed that dynamic kickoff rule. Total disaster. Patterson had the lowest kick return average of any kick returner with double-digit returns. Pittsburgh finished last in the NFL at 23 yards per kick return. They were one of only 4 teams to have a worse kick return average in 24 compared to 2023 under the old kickoff rule. So it's hard to get worse when you have this kickoff rule that was supposed to open up the game a bit. It's not going to be probably a draft pick that's super high or a big free agent or anything like that. But I want to get some more juice, more spark in the kick return game. It's kind of the first line of offense for Pittsburgh, and this offense needs all the help they can get.
And that could also mean when they're drafting one of those receivers or running backs, or it could even be a corner at some point later in the draft, that could be a nice option. So what you got to do is, let me see if I can grab last year's. So what you got to do is you got to, when you get the guide here, the Arledge draft guide for next year. So and I already showed you Tracy's Trice's, excuse me, his bio, and see how extensive it is. Here's how long they are. Anyway, the point is that when you're looking at the receivers, the running backs, the corners, guys that'll be mid to late rounders, check and see if they have some kick return experience.
Always be closing. That's the mantra for Greg. I appreciate it. There's a kid from Toledo. It's Jacquez Stewart. He was a great return guy this year.
Good one.
Pittsburgh loves the Miami to Mac pipelines. He's a Miami boy that went to Toledo. They did with Deontay Johnson, did that with AB. And so keep an eye on him as a potential late day 3 guy.
I like it. See, we're really cooking here, even though it's the end of the show. We saved our best for last. So there you go. That's going to wrap it up for our Pittsburgh coverage here on the Arledge Football Channel. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. We always appreciate that. Check out the links in the description of the video as well, because we have all the different ways that you can contact and connect with Alex and SteelersDepot.com. Podcast, websites, things of that nature, YouTube and such. So that's the easiest way that you can check out what Alex is doing, is you can follow the Steelers, your favorite team. And again, Alex, we appreciate it. Unless something blockbustery happens between now and the draft, look forward to talking to you when the draft is over. And then we'll have a lot to chew on then.
Yeah, awesome, Greg. I appreciate having me on, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good.